Welcome to it. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show. How's it going today? Guess what? It is another installment today of the segment called How Did We Get There? Or How Did We Get Here? And the story of how twins ended up going over the edge in Hana. That's on our How Did We Get Here segment in just a little bit. Also today, since we're talking about crime, okay, actually we talk about politics a lot, but well, politics has a lot to do with crime. I'm going to give you a brief history of criminal investigation and how it came to be a thing. Also, we'll start off with our segment that we've been going across all week, finances. Last week on the Shaggy Jenkins Show, we focused on, oh, by the way, I should say hello. I'm Shaggy Jenkins, critical thinker, problem solver, and guy with a lot of questions. Today's question is, what the hell? And I say that because you've been watching the coverage of the California primaries leading up to them, right? Well, now that the primaries are underway and almost over and all of that, you notice that the Clinton camp did a little one of those tricky Jedi mind tricks that we discussed yesterday on the show. Now, you'll remember that as far as marketing techniques go, Jedi mind trick number one in the rule book of trying to get you to separate from common sense, therefore making a decision that goes against your common sense, Hillary Clinton attempted the absolute number one thing that you can do when it comes to sales.
Fun and informative.
Ahead of the California primary, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton campaign attempted an assumptive close. Now, you'll remember, as far as the Jedi mind tricks of marketing, we talked about how the assumptive close tells the customer, the client, the buyer. If you're a student at Trump University, you're called the buyer, not the student. But if you are one of those people, the client, the buyer, or anything like that, the seller has to convince you that you've already made the decision to buy it. It's just at what level you need to buy into. And that's what Clinton has done ahead of the California primaries. Making the announcement.
Trying to evolve.
Off the record with Bill.
Station. Sexuality, family, pop culture, music, social causes. We talk about it all with a fresh and forward-thinking twist. The Maui Zan
On KAKU 88.5 FM Kahului, Maui, the voice of Maui.
Possible nominations ever in the Democratic National Committee.
Aloha, this is Bill Best.
Mathematically, Bernie Sanders and quantum physics are on the same level of fuzzy, is it possible, isn't possible kind of math. But Hillary Clinton...
Threes, a little later today. On Thursday, when Barry Rivers steps in, he's going to be talking all about the upcoming...
Today, Clinton and AP...
Barry Rivers steps in. Thursday, when Barry Rivers steps in, he's going to be talking all about the upcoming... you guys will be
right.
You'll be at threes a little later today.
No, we'll go to Tiki this time.
Tiki instead of threes. Yeah, John Bowser and Steve Norton. You guys will be
right.
Now further showing the Clinton coronation, the master plan, the assumptive close that she used ahead of the California primaries of saying, I'm already the nominee. There's no need to go out and vote. I'm already the nominee. Thank you so much, Democrats. And then using the AP to help spread that story around. Hillary's trying to stack the numbers, and it's showing up. If you look at some of the publications out of California, stories are of a young Uber driver in San Francisco going, I thought Hillary already won. Why do I need to go out and vote for Bernie now? See, the assumptive close is going to keep people away from the polls. And she knew this because it's one of the biggest Jedi mind tricks that you can use when trying to sell somebody on something, when trying to close that deal. Tell them the deal is already closed. And if the deal is already closed, then there is nothing to do but accept it. Now, we've seen this kind of behavior before politically from, well, both sides of the political aisle. But as blatant as it is right now on the part of the Democratic Party is unheard of. Usually we reserve this type of behavior for, the more right-winged, authoritarian, loving, power-hungry side of the aisle. On the left side of the aisle, where things are supposed to be happy, sunshine, rainbows, and humanitarianism and equal rights for everyone, where it's supposed to be that, it is more like the movie of Mean Girls with Hillary Clinton being Gretchen Wiener. Of influencing through bullying or through, we've talked about this multiple times, the Clinton point system of trying to influence the way that the party deals with her versus how she deals with the rules of the party. Like true royalty, she tries to bend the will of the body that she's supposed to serve versus bending herself to follow the party's ideals. And that's a dangerous tipping point in political power. So Hillary Clinton right now is trying to use a Jedi mind trick on everybody called the assumptive close. It is one of the tricks that we've been talking about in our money stuff segment this week. Yesterday we started off with some of the ways that marketers and advertisers use to close the deal to make sure that you're separated from your common sense and eventually your money. Hillary Clinton is trying to separate you from your common sense and therefore your voice, aka your vote. And in a country where, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have primaries and we couldn't really select who we would put on the ticket, you would think that we would be very adamant about the policies and infrastructures around that procedure. You would think that we would look at it with almost microscopic investigation. And instead, what we do is we let Clinton and we let other politicians, even Trump on the Republican side, we let them do this assumptive close of coming out in front of people ahead of the actual results and saying, well, I'm it. Deal with me. And that's kind of one of those Jedi mind tricks that we've got to be really careful about, not only on the finance side, but on the political side. Of letting the politicians tell us that it's already a reality and our best movement forward is to just deal with it. That's scary. So let's get into some more of these Jedi mind tricks today that you can now be aware of people use on a daily basis to separate you from your common sense and eventually you from your money. Now, here's one of the ones that I wanted to talk about on the previous show. It's called the DTR method. And the DTR method is used on, dear God, how do I say this? Everything. Not only in sales, but in news presentation. Fox News uses the DTR method. It's called disrupt, then refrain. Okay? First, you tell people something that's just slightly confusing, maybe a little nonsensical. Trump eats babies in New Jersey today. Okay? Slightly confusing, nonsensical, because you're thinking, how did anybody give Donald Trump a baby to eat? And or the other question, why is it taken the media so long to realize that Trump eats babies? I don't know what side of that story you're on, but if I were to frame a story like Trump eats babies in New Jersey, and then when you show up for the main thing, and I was like, yes, Trump did show up and eat a couple of sugar babies with the Women's Quilting Guild of Southern New Jersey. You see what I'm saying? I've disrupted you, and then when you showed up, like, huh? What the heck is going on? Because natural human curiosity drew you back to me. I then reframe it in something that keeps you there, okay? I've distracted you. I've disrupted your way of thinking long enough to get your curiosity, and then I reframe whatever I was saying in a way that gets you to do what I want, or to think how I want. Now, there is an example of where you could tell somebody, it's like, hey, you know what? This car goes 4 miles on 3 quarts of gas. What? That is huge gas savings when you add it up. Oh, yeah, it is. Who in their right damn mind measures how many quarts of fuel it takes to make a mile? However, because I said one argument and then waited for you to react to it and then reframed it as something very, very positive, your brain didn't have time to analyze what I was actually saying, and therefore, you believe what comes out of my mouth. Now, you want to know somebody that's real good at the DTR method? Look no further than the RNC nominee, Mr. Trump, who right now is in the news trying to disrupt the argument about his illegal dealings under the Trump University and reframe it as an argument that, oh God, this is so weird. If you think about what he's saying, if you look at the actual text of the words that are coming out of his mouth, he has disrupted people thinking that he is a bad businessman, and instead started to reframe this as Mexico coming back in spades to make sure that Mr. Trump doesn't become president of the United States. Oh no! This is not about him being a shady, slimy salesman. This is about those damn foreigners and their foreign influence in United States government trying to stop me from becoming president. That's how Donald Trump has used the disrupt then reframe argument. And if you don't think it's working, look at the polls. It worked. And not only did it worked to scary effect. And the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, Donald Trump is a candidate that has done nothing other than one sleazy Jedi mind trick of marketing. Disrupt, then reframe. Coming back, we'll talk about more ways that they celebrate your stupidity and separate you from common sense and your money. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show. 88.5 FM, the voice of Maui. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show. Welcome back to it. And thanks if this is your first time checking out the show. I'm your host, Shaggy Jenkins. Glad to meet you. We've been talking a little bit about finances this week, and I thought that before we talk about all the stuff that me and Dr. Till Hansen wrote about in the book, Money Stuff, yes, I am actually a published author as well as a dapper host of a radio show, dare I say. For some of my radio listeners, that means dapper. I'm well dressed, but for you on the radio, you don't care. I could be wearing burlap sack. But before we went to the break, we talked about how politicians use sales methods and how Hillary Clinton used the assumptive close method ahead of the California primary, and how Donald Trump has used the disrupt then reframe method to keep people interested in his campaign and to keep it moving along. Now, there's other shady techniques that we all know of, but we're not aware on a conscious level are being done to us, that politicians use all the time. This method is called the peas in the pod method, or the inclusive language sales technique. Inclusive language means that you, the seller, identify them, the buyer, in a peas in a pod, us on the lifeboat together type of scenario. People like us would make this decision. People like us would do this. And that's how politicians use the peas in the pod method when they go out and try to elicit your vote. They go out and say, well, guys like me and you, women like me and you, people like us do these things, therefore, vis-a-vis, I'm your guy / girl. / politician waiting to be bought by a lobbyist group. Whatever, your language on that can be whatever you want to make it. But what I'm saying is the peas in the pod method is something that salespeople know works, because this is terrible. Once you exploit one factor of human psychology, and that is the communal factor. Humans are social creatures. As a matter of fact, not only does science think that eating meat, I'm sorry, vegetarians, but eating meat allowed us to evolve, they also thought that our social interaction with each other allowed us to evolve at much higher rates than other species, therefore making us somewhat close to the top of the food chain. I don't want to say we're top of the food chain because I've never fought a bear. And until I do, I'm going to say that there's stuff out there that could eat us. However, the peas in the pod sales method takes advantage of this hardwired psychology. Something that is built into us at a genetic level of needing to belong with other human beings in whatever situation that we're in, of commonality being a necessity. Salespeople, politicians, marketers, what have you, use the peas in the pod method to imply that you and them are of like mind. Therefore, you will both make the same decisions. And if you're a politician, that decision is, hey, I'm the person that should be in office. Why, yes, I do agree with you, because people like us should be in office to do these things that people like us would do. The peas in the pod method assures you that whoever you're talking to is so like-minded that you cannot disagree with them. And like I said, before you think that this is something that people don't know happens, we see it all the time. You've seen it in sitcoms before. Oh, don't start saying people like us. I'm not people like you. You see that all the time. However, in a subtle way, because of the way that it keeps getting used over and over and over and over again, it's fallen into the background of the noise of conversation. So on a conscious level, we don't realize when somebody is trying to pull us into the peas in the pod, the inclusive language sales technique. We don't know when that's happening, because we have been inundated with that language. But politicians depend on you, the voter. Salespeople depend on you, the buyer, feeling some sort of communal spirit, some sort of social connection to them, so that they can exploit it to get you to do what they want you to do versus what your motivations in your head and your heart would tell you to do otherwise. And that's a big, big no-no. Whenever you have to convince somebody of the legitimacy of your argument by framing them in that argument as well, without them realistically being there. I mean, come on, there are some circumstances that we do have to say, look, we're in a lifeboat, there's a hole in it, somebody's got to plug the hole. That's a reality. That's a situation that's occurring in a real fluid environment. So, that kind of black and white mentality is okay in that circumstance. But the circumstance I set up before that, no. There might be some gray areas in there. And so when it comes to trying to get people to come out of their own gray areas about their feelings and emotions of stuff, and come into an area where they're either in your black or in somebody else's white, the peas in the pod or inclusive language sales technique is a good way of eliciting support that you wouldn't normally have from someone else. Framing yourself and your subject as like mind, of like need, of like want, it makes them act like you want them to. And this is one of the Jedi mind tricks that we're talking about this week. I know that this is a series on finance right now, but this doesn't just apply to finances. This includes arguments within your family and definitely arguments on the political stage. So even though that kind of language has been out there, it's permeated our collective consciousness so much that it's become unconscious language, we need to understand that when that language starts getting used to us, whatever that person is pitching, we need to consider not from peas in the pod, but from what are you trying to pull me into, sucker? And it's just one of the ways that you can fight back against the mind tricks that marketers, politicians use to separate you from common sense and eventually your money. We've got time for one more. And this one is, This is one of the ones that I absolutely hate because I fell victim to it, okay? I'm not going to lie. I was going to make up some story of, it happened to a friend of mine. No, it happened to me. It has the stupidest name in the book. It's called the door in the face technique because literally when you get hit by it, that's what it feels like. When you realize that you've been suckered by the door in the face technique, that's what it feels like. You almost can feel the foreheaded bruise from where the door smacked you in the face. Let's set up this technique because the door in the face technique is a lot like the disrupt then reframe technique. However, it uses what I like to call blunt force trauma vocalization. Now, if you're familiar with crimes and things like that, you know blunt force is anything that's hit round, not a stabbing motion, and maybe like a baseball bat, sledgehammer, stuff like that. Blunt force. Door in the face is a brute or blunt force attack on your senses, whereas disrupt then reframe tries to set your mind confused at first and then reframe it into something different. Door in the face hits you with two situations, one ridiculous and one that's maybe ridiculous, but when in the context of comparing it to the first argument, makes a lot more plausible sense to your audience. Here's how it goes. Let's say you're trying to borrow money from your husband, your wife, your parents, your auntie, your uncle, and you go up to them and you say, "Hey, let me have $1,000. What? Hell no, I don't have $1,000. Okay, how about $10? Oh, okay, sure. Here's $10. You see how that works? The door in the face technique hits you with something so unbelievable that whatever argument that you set up after it, and remember, it has to be a diminutive argument. You can't say, give me $1,000. No, I'm just kidding. Give me $5,000. It doesn't work like that. That's the door followed by the Mack truck hitting you in the face. That leaves people dead to your wants. So that's not how the technique works. You hit them with something big and almost out of the realm of belief, and then you hit them with what you really want, which in the context of the argument makes them way more likely to agree with your actual request, because you've framed it into something that was impossible for them to do versus something that's possible for them to do. Not something that's likely that they would do, not something that even they're motivated to do on their own whims. But you've presented people with something that's possible for them to do. And because you've framed it in this argument of impossible possible, Remember how the human psyche likes to fight between being a good guy and a bad guy? A demon, an angel? It engages that fight the same way that other methods do, like the "but you are free to decide" method. The door in your face method, though, presents you with two likely scenarios. Well, two scenarios, one very unlikely and one likely. Not a good or bad, evil versus right type of argument, however, possible versus impossible. And the mind works on those arguments the same way it does with, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Is this possible for me to do? No, this is possible for me to do, therefore I do it. And the door in the face technique engages that sense of impossible versus possible, bypassing things like, logically, is this something I want to do? Financially, is this something I can do? And that's the big question, financially. Because these techniques are not used just in politics, dear friends. They're used in everyday sales. And every time they're used, it costs you money. So be aware of these techniques today. The disrupt, then reframe argument, the peas in the pod, inclusive sales language technique, and the door in the face technique. Be aware of these, as well as the other ones that we've talked about, and more that'll be coming up on the next show. I'm making a whole series of this, how to not get Jedi mind tricked out of your money. Be aware of these techniques. Look for them when they're being used against you, and know what you're really signing up for when you do sign that dotted line. Coming up in a sec, we'll have a segment called How Did We Get Here? The story of the Power Twins on Maui and the history of criminal investigation. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show. .5 FM. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show. Welcome back to it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to follow me online, you can. I have a Twitter. It's at Shaggy Live. Also on Facebook, you can find me, facebook.com/Shaggy Live. Easy name to spell. But whatever your name is, if you want to drop me a letter, you can do that as well. Email shaggyjenkins@gmail.com. Okay, it's that time of the week where we do our segment called How Did We Get Here? What we do is we take a story that's out there in the news in a big way, and we go back through the history of that story to find out how did we get to this point. Now, today's story, the finishing point is a twin has been charged with murder. The beginning point of that story doesn't even begin here on the Isle, not here on Maui, but another sand-swept, tourism-based city called Miami. And today's story is, how did the Power Twins, or as they're called in a lot of publications across Florida and Utah, the Terrible Twins of Yoga, how did they end up here? Well, let's look a little bit at their story. At the beginning of this decade, the two blondes were cruising around in Palm Beach with matching Ferraris, white. They had just expanded their business into other parts of high-dollar communities. And publications were in love with the twin sisters, Anne and Allison. Now, I know to a lot of people, the names Anne Dido and Allison Dido do not sound familiar, because they're the ones that live here on Maui, and they've only seen the Maui after results. But let's start back when Anne and Allison, not Alexis and Anastasia, were in Florida, successful entrepreneurs, darlings of the media. with beautiful write-ups, including one in the Post of Florida that basically just said, here it is, a very spiritually lovely business ran by two women without a business plan whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, in the 2010 article that I read today, coming from Gossip Extra, which linked over to the old West Palm story, according to them, during that time, the sisters were known as power entrepreneurs. And everything that they touched, dare I say, just like King Midas, turned to gold during that time. They started with a small business called Twin Power Yoga, and it went off of this Indian Ashtangi. I don't know yoga, okay? But apparently it's a big deal with certain people. People with money and too little time on their hands. Too much time on their hands. But somebody likes yoga, damn it, and these women taught it to a very high-dollar clientele up until, and I'm talking about years and years of expansion, from 2010 to 2014, the business grew and grew and grew. Twin Power Yoga in Florida became like one of those names that you knew was going to become a franchise, and almost did. Until all of a sudden, the girls' lifestyle caught up with them. It took me driving and just really digging my nose through 7 or 8 different newspapers and stories to kind of get a picture of how that great start with the Power Twin Yoga thing ended up with them in Utah declaring bankruptcy sometime around 2014. Appears the excess of success got to the girls' heads. And they were started to be seen in ritzier and ritzier parts of town, throwing out higher and higher amounts of extravagant cash. So, one day, not too long after their sudden windfall of success and becoming media darlings, all of a sudden employees, clients, and everybody showed up to the Power Twin Yoga studios in Miami, and they were closed, with no notification of why. Employees were left unpaid, contracts were left unrefunded. Some people had even signed up for up to a year, and prepaid, a year membership. And these women's work was not cheap. If we're talking about yoga on the scale of restaurants, most people kind of see yoga as a Jack in the Box, a McDonald's kind of things. These women were more of a high-dollar spago sort of affair. A high cuisine, maybe like a Gordon Ramsay type of restaurant. They were couture of yoga. So when they disappeared from Florida, breaking a lot of people's hearts, banks, lives, what did they do? Where did they go? And why? Well, that question is very hard to answer between Florida and Utah, but between Utah and Maui on the next stage, oh my God. But before we get there, here it is. The Power Twins, they've left Florida. They have left a financial damage path wake so wide behind them that entire bodies are being swallowed up in it. Lives are being lost in it. And then they decided, hey, you know what? Utah, economically, a lot like Miami, let's go to one of these big ski resort areas, find some funders, and set up another Power Twin Yoga thing. And, of course, it went horrible, with both sisters filing out for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Now, I know you're thinking, well, that's bad. But let's also look at their behavior. Remember how I said the excesses of their successes got to their head? All the stories in Florida paint the sisters as beautiful, talented, smart, entrepreneurial. When you start trying to look up the story of Anne and Allison Dado in Utah, you see a picture of reckless endangerment, driving under the influence, trying to evade arrest, disorderly conduct. You see substance abuse and violence following the sisters' names at this point. So we went from success in Florida to now train wreck in Utah, and you can only stay a train wreck in a place like Utah for so long. Think about it. Utah, pigs and cows outnumber people. So people don't have a whole lot of chance to screw up. You get noticed, and that's exactly what happened to the sisters, and they were noticed. Filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, basically being the toast of every gossip columnist in town. The train wreck twins at this point disappeared once again. And if you think it was mysterious trying to track the motivations between Florida and Utah when they showed back up on the map, this is where the story gets not fuzzy, but downright hairy. Because between Utah and the plethora of charges that both sisters had against them, including the Chapter 7 bankruptcy, they arrived here on Maui December of last year under the names of Anastasia and, if I'm not mistaken, Alexia Duval, not Dido. Now, nobody knows why they chose Duval other than, oh, maybe it's a yoga thing, and it harkens back to one of the big yoga people. What do you call them? Yogis. There it is, yogi. And according to all the people that knew them on their life of Maui, the sisters were very much still into the trying to create a yoga business. But if we look at their history of the yoga business, you can tell that that was going to be a failed enterprise. The entrepreneurship at this point has led away into some sort of lifestyle in Utah that they had, that if I'm an outsider looking in at their story, I'm going to say that the chances of success aren't all there. And because of those big pressures, and this is just theory at this point, because just last, Monday, news had finally hit the big circuit that June 1st, the driver of the SUV carrying the Power Twins, the survivor, has been charged with second-degree murder. And the reason why Anne Dido, a.k.a. Anastasia Duval, the reason that she died is up for contention. Because according to witnesses on the scene, on May 29th, the two sisters were in an SUV having an argument off the side of Hana Highway. And if you're not familiar with Hana Highway, it is one of the most beautiful drives in the world. But it is also one of the most dangerous drives in the United States and the world, boasting such things as 200-foot sheer drop-offs to rocky crags and tumultuous oceans below. And on May 29th, that's where we find these two sisters that had started off successful entrepreneurs at the beginning of the decade, had went through a soul-crushing descent into each personal hell that they ended up in, only to be found on May 29th by witnesses having an argument, and nobody has released any, words or anything that was said, but the two sisters having an argument in an SUV off the side of one of the most dangerous roads in the United States, when the driver, Allison, a.k.a. Alexandria Duval, hit the accelerator Witnesses say that Anne, her passenger, pulled on the hair, tried to pull on the steering wheel, but at that point it was too late. The car went from a 0 dead stop to over 40 miles per hour and then plunged past witnesses down a 200-foot cliff. Now, search and rescue, because of the conditions of the sea and stuff, took a long time to kind of extract the women. And when they did, Anne was dead. Allison was in bad shape. But here's a little known fact, and this is going to be something that'll come up in our next segment when we talk about the history of criminal investigation. Cars now have something in them akin to a flight data recorder on airplanes. And if you know how the NTSB, National Travel Safety Board, how they work investigations, when a plane crashes, they pull the black box, as it's called, and they look at what the vehicle, in this case the airplane, was doing at the time of its crash, if there was anything mechanically wrong with it. Cars also have this technology called the automatic control. Well, it's the ACM, all right? The airbag control module. There's a bunch of different names, but ACM. An ACM works the same in your car as a black box does in an airplane. And what the ACM of this Ford Escape that Allison and Anne, Anastasia and Alexandra, whatever you want to call them, were in, the ACM doesn't lie. It says that the car went from a 0 mile per hour, a dead stop, to 40 miles per hour with no brake applied. In other words, the driver did this action deliberately because the car's ACM says the pedal was depressed fully, the wheel was turned hard left, and according to witnesses, that's when Allison, the driver, against Anne trying to pull against her, managed to point the Ford on a death drop over Lahana Highway. And according to the ACM, everything that happened in that car, the moment that led to one twin sister now being charged with second-degree murder of her sister, everything, at least on paper, at least coming from the car's black box, looks deliberate. Therefore, from entrepreneur to now twinless sibling and murder suspect, we have found ourselves here in Maui, in custody, awaiting trial. That's how we got here on the story of the Power Twins. It's all over the papers today. But unless you really look back and see their lives for how it happened over the past 6 years, this plunging over the cliff action that they did in Maui makes absolutely no sense to you whatsoever. But looking at it in the context of where they were, how they lived, and where they ended up, we see a story of the excess of success leading to tragic ends. And that's today's How Did We Get Here segment. If you have anything that you would like to see on this segment or hear on it, drop me an email, shaggyjenkins@gmail.com. But since we're talking about it and I have a couple of minutes here left in the show, I want to talk about a very interesting fact that a lot of us probably don't appreciate. It's criminal investigations and how they have helped make us a more just society. Now, I am one of these people that I like to question not only the police and their methodology, but the judicial system and how they police the police and how the citizen... I like to look at the whole culture around crime. In fact, if you're interested, I've actually started kind of you could say the roots of a cold case investigation volunteer group. because forensics and investigation is a hobby of mine. I know. Most people have normal hobbies. I like to look through old case files. But one of the things that always strikes me when I look through these case files and I read these detective notes and I read these criminal scene investigator notes and stuff like that, the one thing that gets me is how do they know to do that stuff? So I started looking in the origin of CSI, of crime scene investigation. And what I found is crazy. Because the person that gave us CSI also gave us one of the literary world's greatest detectives. And if you have no idea who I'm talking about, oh my God, did you not go to a public school in the United States? I am referring, of course, of Sherlock Holmes. Now, back in my day, when I was a young lad, when I was in elementary school, Sherlock Holmes and the Hounds of Baskerville was kind of required reading. We had to read at least one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. You could say that reading that story in elementary school inspired me to like crime investigation. But here's the thing. The author of that book, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, actually shadowed the real life guy that was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. This was one Dr. Joseph Bell, and his contribution to the world was the method. Joseph Bell deduced that through careful observation, and only careful observation, one could conclude someone's upbringing, education level, finance level, any physical ailments, chronic or systemic diseases. Only through observation and knowing what to look for, Dr. Joseph Bell says, you can apply the method, to find out anything that you want to find out. Now, Dr. Joseph Bell worked in the medical profession. But because of his work with dead bodies, aka cadavers, and the effects of certain injuries and other, causes of death of those days that he had experience with, Scotland Yard and other investigating bodies across the UK started using Joseph Bell's method, including calling Joseph Bell himself to show up and help them investigate crimes. One of the biggest crimes that Joseph Bell was a part of was the Jack the Ripper case. In fact, he was one of the only guys that probably nailed who Jack the Ripper really was. Of course, Scotland Yard never prosecuted anybody, and the crime remained unsolved. However, during the time that Joseph Bell was alive, he would go and implore the police station around him, use my observation to help you solve these crimes. Understand what a gunshot looks like as a fatal wound versus a gunshot after a person has deceased. How does blood move when a body has expired? He's the one that discovered things like pooling, that if you have a dead body laying on the ground, the blood will naturally seek to the side that's lowest to the ground. And even if you move that body, if you look at a pattern on the skin, you can tell when they were dead, newly dead that is, how they landed. Which is the basis of CSI today. Joseph Bell, a.k.a. the real Sherlock Holmes, established one part of CSI all the way over in the UK. Now, who established it here in the US? Look no further than the guy that also helped establish the Secret Service. I'm talking, of course, about the Pinkerton Agency. Pinkertons were a group of for-hire protectors, bounty hunters, and mostly employed through Wells Fargo to ensure that their money shipments got wherever they needed to on the mainland. Found notoriety because Pinkerton, the leader of the Pinkerton Agency, also believed in wearing disguises to infiltrate your enemies, using Joseph Bell's method to deduce who committed a crime after said crime was committed and they've all left the scene. His investigation methods led to the creation of offices like the FBI here in the United States, as well as founding the Office of the Secret Service. And Pinkerton's investigation work that was based off of his work, of his like and understanding of Dr. Joseph Bell's work, led to American criminal investigation. And we're talking about everything from fingerprints to DNA evidence, to looking at how somebody's footfall on the ground determines how heavy they are, how tall they are, and what direction they were heading, if they have a limp or if they don't have a limp. All of these methods started off from a medical doctor and then a guy that was in charge of making sure that banks didn't get robbed. From there, it evolved into what we know now as crime scene investigation, of deducing from observation of what you're seeing what happened prior to that moment. And because of the work of pioneers like these two gentlemen that goes way, way back in history, today we have things like a criminal system that can and does correct itself from time to time, of being able to look at people effectively at a time of investigation and saying, you don't fit the profile because of the evidence that I am seeing, not because of some sort of gut feeling or stuff. And so us, the public, when we look at crime scenes, investigations, and things like that, we get frustrated from time to time thinking, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. But when it comes to the history of crime in the United States, cops have had a long time to perfect their own method. But it started way back with doctors and money. Doesn't everything? We'll see you on tomorrow's show.